author is Arthur Cola. He's going to talk to you about Vivi's War. Arthur is a prolific author, and you may know him from his murder series, including Murder at the Vatican, Murder in Capri. His exuberance is infectious, both in person and in his writing. As a former history teacher and principal, he naturally creates complex and realistic settings and equally fascinating characters who navigate the wrinkles in history. Arthur travels extensively as part of his writing experience. He visits and immerses in the places and the people in order to write them authentically. And today he'll be reading from his new book, Vivi's War, published by Newman Springs in 2023. Come on up.
Thank you.
See how special you are?
I am special. The other day, we had dinner at the local Italian restaurant in our town of Burlington, Wisconsin, called Napoli's. And it was in honor of my wife's Mother's Day thing. And my little granddaughter, 7 years old, was there, and my son and his wife and so forth. And they were making a fuss. And the little girl goes, "Papa, are you a celebrity?" And she just made me feel like a celebrity here. So I thank you very much.
You're awesome. You are a celebrity. I mean, you're a writer.
Many years ago, when I started writing, I began presenting books here at Casa Italia. Dominic would invite me every year, and so it's been an honor for me to be here for a long time. When 2023 was rolling around, I was thinking of that being kind of a, I don't know, what would you call it, a special year or a scary year for me, because it was one of those benchmark birthdays that you don't like to talk about, like Dominic mentioned, fearing to cross that threshold of 80. And so I said, well, let's do it something positive about that. What was going on in 1943 when I was born in July of that year? And I began doing research, and part of that research was going to Italy and visiting my ancestral homeland and my ancestral village, which was called San Pietro Avellana, in what is then was Abruzzo, but now is called Molise. And it's right on the border between the two provinces, and it's in the Apennine Mountains. And the mayor knew that I was writing a book, and he took me around the little town and so forth, and immersed me in the history of this little village, which I found fascinating, because as a history teacher, not only was there a historical aspect of that, but the people he was talking about were my ancestors. The people who came to Chicago to start a new life, to breathe the air of freedom, because they had been living under Mussolini. And I was thrilled with the whole story, but I found out something even more special than that. There was a connection of that little village in the mountains to the royal family at the time, the last royal family of Italy before the end of World War II. 1943 was a pivotal year in the World War II. It was a year when everything began to shift in favor of the Allies. And no better place could you see that happening than in Italy itself. The King of Italy, Victor Emmanuel III, was figuring out a way to overthrow Mussolini without causing a revolution and having Italy totally decimated and destroyed as an independent country. His son, who would later become the last king of Italy, Umberto, and Umberto's wife, Princess Marie Jose, were also involved in a conspiracy with the Allies. And that conspiracy was to create an armistice in which the Allies would recognize Italy as an independent country, not affiliated with Nazi Germany, and able to establish a democratic government under King Victor Emmanuel III. So that princess went to my little village in the mountains as a way to get a little town in the south near Naples, where the Allied troops were beginning to form as they began their march up the peninsula to take over Italy. And with her, she had an armistice agreement. That armistice agreement was presented to General Clark, and who headed the Fifth Army of the American Army, and was rejected because Princess Marie Jose was not the monarch or the head of government. And she had to come back and try to find a way to present the armistice through the king himself, because she knew she couldn't do it through Mussolini, because he wouldn't listen. He wouldn't say, you know, Italy is losing the war and we're going to be destroyed as a country. So she had to come back. In the process of coming back, she was involved with some spies from Nazi Germany, which is all becomes part of the story. But in my little town, while she was plotting all of this, two teenage boys were figuring out what was happening to their homeland. They were 14 years old. One of them was William Cogliani, my cousin, and the other one was Amario Settefrate, and another branch of the family, my family. They were plotting a way in which they can help the Allies. They knew the Allies were coming up. They were going to reach Monte Cassino pretty soon, and they wanted to do something to help the Allies. So my job in writing the story was, how do I take an actual historical event of what the royal family was doing and connect it to what these two teen boys were trying to do, and make it a story that people would learn something about what Italy was going through, but at the same time have a little fun, because they are teenagers, you know, and I taught teenagers for 30 years, so I know what I'm talking about. And they are royals, you know, they are who they are. So that's what this story tries to do. It tries to integrate what was going on historically in Italy, and you're going to meet Mussolini. You're going to meet him in a way probably you never imagined that you would meet him. It would be during the week of, about the third week of July 1943, when the king finally found a way to call for a vote and remove Mussolini from power. And it turns out my two teenage characters are brought to Rome to be Mussolini's caretakers, because he was going to be imprisoned and they just wanted someone. That's not me. It's my ring, but it's not me. The cathedral bells, my kids gave me the cathedral bells because I worked for the church for 35 years. So anyway, the two boys become involved as the caretakers of Mussolini. And at the same time, they're able to intercept information from the Vatican. And they become involved with another true story. Monsignor Montini, who would become now St. Paul VI, the Pope. And Monsignor Montini would distribute information of what the Allies were doing to the resistance in Italy to remove Mussolini, okay? And the boys became messengers between Montini and these rebel groups and the royal family to keep everybody informed on what they could do to call for the vote to remove Mussolini from power. And that happened in the third week of July 1943. And then the story goes on and shows a whole different side of Mussolini after he was no longer under the thumb of Adolf Hitler. I hope you find it because there's a Chicago connection in it. The whole story begins with a letter from Chicago from my grandfather to his sister in San Pietro Avellana about what was going on in America and how that letter was censored by the Nazis, and how they began writing through the Vatican in order not to get censored letters. And so in chapter 1, you're going to hear just a little bit about that letter and how it starts the whole thing for these teenage kids to try to save Italy from Hitler. Nestled amongst the peaks, gorges, and plateaus of the Apennine mountain range, which creates a limestone and dolomite rock backbone for the Italian peninsula, lies the tiny village of San Pietro Avellana. The hamlet's only claim to fame as World War II hits high gear is that it contains a pasta factory, which is a source of food for Italy and beyond and is home for the white truffle. It also has a railroad station and delivery system to bring the product as well as people throughout Italy. It is completely surrounded by rugged terrain, which is really a part of the Gran Sasso d'Italia chain, and forests of beech, oak, and pinewood trees, as well as rocky grazing land for sheep and goats. The ancient stones of the Solmites still lie in the cobblestone main streets of San Pietro. Along that uneven path of Via San Paolo, a woman is running out of the post office, waving a letter and shouting. Clothed in the free-flowing black dress which gave her the appearance of an elderly matron rather than her 35 years of age, and long brunette hair flying in the soft June breezes, she is shouting, "Cenza, a letter has come from America." As soon as the word America was heard, heads began to pop out of the homes and businesses along her route to the home of Cenza and Bernardino Frattini. The home she sought was a modest stone structure built from the rocks which surrounded the village, as were all the structures. The church of Saints Peter and Paul was no exception, as she stopped to make the sign of the cross. She had turned onto Largo della Chiesa, the street on which the 15th century church stood. Its bells were ringing out the noon Angelus, thus to stopping in her tracks to pray the Ave Maria. Then she went down the stone stairs to another level of the street on which the school building stood. The excitement was spreading quickly in this town of only 2,000, where almost everyone knew each other or were related in some fashion. She, however, did not have followers accompanying her. In fact, the very issue of her parading in such a fashion down a street in 1943 was a risk which many thought to be foolish, given that the Nazi troops were stationed throughout the village. They were even inside the post office where she worked and from which she was running. Their eyes followed her every move, as if the missive she held tightly clutched in her glistening, narrow fingers, now feeling the warmth of the growing summer days, was of a military nature. However, even the private soldier knew that such a demonstration of mail delivery was of no importance to them, for she would never have been allowed to leave the post office in the first place. And so their eyes followed her movement, but they did not pursue her. And then the story goes on of what happens when they open the letter and they read the letter from Chicago and make the connection of what the Allies were doing to come to free Italy. And that's it. I'm not going to take a lot of time because I wanted you to have a good Do you have any questions about the history at the time, or the characters involved, or Monsignor Montini, the king, the prince, the two teen boys? Those two teen boys saved Italy in real history. What happened, what you see, that guy right there, Scolzoni, is the Nazi colonel who was put in charge of freeing Mussolini after he was arrested after his deposition from power. His people devised a plan to divide Italy in half, and that plan meant that they would destroy every city and town and village between the Mediterranean Sea around Monte Cassino all the way across to the Adriatic Sea. And my village was one of those villages that was destroyed. And the boys became involved because they spied on the Nazis as they planted mines across the line. And when the Allied troops came, they were able to identify the mine locations and save the 5th American Army, the Canadian Army, and the Polish Army in exile from being exterminated by the mine locations as they crossed the Apennines.
Sounds like a screenplay.
Yeah.
It would be a great movie for Italians. Yeah.
I have a question for you about your writing process. So your work, especially this work, but I think all your work is very heavily rooted in history, and you do your research, and you have these, the plots are intricate. But I'm interested in how do you create your characters, and how do you make your characters come to life within those really intricate plots? Like, what's your process like?
Well, in this particular case, William Poliani was easy to do because he's a living being, and told me the story firsthand of what happened when he was a little boy, a teenage boy. So that was a little easier to do. That cousin Emilio was not easy to do because I never knew this cousin existed till I went to Italy. And so I had to create kind of a contrast to the kind of kid William was. William was the scholarly, down to earth, and we're going to do this and type of person. Amedio, I made the more fun-loving, girl-chasing type of kid, and how they balanced each other as they pursued their spy mission. It was easier with the Prince Umberto and Princess Marie Jose because they're, again, historical people. And Princess Marie Jose is the son of the daughter of the Belgian king, and her brother, who became king of the Belgians, was in prison during this time period and treated mercilessly by Hitler, even starving him in his own palace dungeon. So she had a vendetta against Hitler and hated him. Berto hated him too, and when Hitler came to Italy to visit and prop up Mussolini, Prince Umberto refused to meet with him, but was forced to give up his bedroom to Adolf Hitler in the palace.
When you do historical fiction, how do you decide what part has to be real and what part is imaginary, and how do you work them together?
Well, I take the actual historical activity or happening, and then I look at my characters, and they're probably involved in another part of a historical situation like William was. By the way, Vivi is a nickname for William in my hometown, and everyone in my hometown in Italy calls William Vivi. That's why it's Vivi's War. So I have to figure out a way in which to blend, and the way I did that in this particular story is by bringing William and Amedio to meet the princess, and then the princess gives them a duty, presents them to the king, who gives them a spy mission because they're kids and nobody would suspect them, and that's how I brought the two parallel historical events and then created a fiction which brought them together. Yes.
So you said that two boys existed in real life and changed the course of history. Were they ever recognized for what they had done during the
The
war?
kids?
Yes.
No. They were asked to write their story, but that's all. What happened was that a year after the war ended, there was a vote in Italy and the monarchy was defeated, and so the king couldn't present them with the medals. In the story, however, they are recognized because it was long overdue.
Any other questions? All right, excellent.
Okay, thank you.